Hello and welcome to the Situation Report today. Very glad to have you joining me. This is the show where we do our best to provide the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. My name is Jeremy Stolniker. I am your host, and today we have a wonderful guest on that as this interview wrapped up, I felt like I could have continued talking and asking questions and listening to him for much, much longer. We did not go the 2 hours that I thought I would like to go, but an incredible conversation. And again, when we look at a culture that is shifting, trying to gain the right perspectives and get the right information, we need people who can give us context, that is, go back historically and help us to understand where a lot of the actions that are being taken by our government and a lot of the things that we're seeing happen in culture, where those came from, the foundations of our nation, how that has moved and changed. But then from that perspective, then look forward. Where do we need to go and how can we get there? We're navigating an ever-changing culture. The goal is not to simply understand why things are as bad as they are, and that seems to be where a lot of people are camping. We need to understand what is actually happening, why it's happening, and how we can leverage what's happening to move forward in a good way. And today's guest does that. My guest is Michael Wilkerson. Michael is the author of the book, Why America Matters, The Case for a New Exceptionalism. He has a website, Stormwall, which we talk about in this episode as well. He's written another book. He has written several articles, continues to write, and is very active writing for major news outlets and on his website as well. And he talks about so many different aspects of what's happening in our world. He has 30 years of experience in business. He's been an investor, a financial advisor. He's the chairman of Charity Water, incredible nonprofit that he is a part of. And so as he writes on these issues, he writes about them from a deep knowledge of finance, financial markets, the economy, but also incredible grasp on history, brings all of that to bear and helps to chart a course forward. Very grateful to have him on today. And I know you will appreciate this interview, this conversation with Michael Wilkerson. Michael, thank you for joining me. Appreciate it.
Jeremy, happy to be with you today.
There is so much that we could talk about, and I want to jump into a few different topics as we walk through this, but I would love, first of all, to just start with your story. You have a very interesting background, a pretty diverse background, and you're into probably similar in your mind things. I would imagine they all connect to your core values and who you are as a person, but it's pretty diverse and pretty deep. Can you just kind of give us your background and how you got to where you are right now?
Sure, happy to. So the way I introduce myself in one line or less is that I'm a strategic advisor, investor, and author. The strategic advisor has to do with a background. I spent over a decade, almost 15 years on Wall Street as a merger and acquisitions advisor. So I was doing large cap cross-border transactional work at the eve of the financial crisis. I got seconded into financial institutions, working on some of the big bank crises and other things that were going on at the time. After that, I started, at the same time, around 2006, I'd gotten involved in a nonprofit called Charity Water, which was focused on solving the world water crisis for the nearly 1 billion people around the world who didn't have safe access to clean drinking water. And I'd always had a real interest in poverty and justice issues, had the mind of a financial guy, and was always looking for ways to try to bring those two worlds together. I got to know Africa. I got to know Charity through Charity Water and the work we were doing there to deploy investment capital in countries all over the continent. And so in 2013, 2014, I started to work for myself with a couple of other individuals, basically doing private equity style investing in Africa around the issue of food security, energy security. We were invested in food and ag, in renewable energy, in schools, financial institutions, that sort of thing. And I did that really for all of that decade between 2013 and the last couple of years. Something radically changed in March of 2020, as you know, which is we entered into lockdowns. I had been traveling for 7 years back and forth on the commuter flight between Atlanta and Johannesburg, almost, certainly every month and sometimes even more frequently than that. And then it just came to an abrupt halt. And when it did, during that time, during my Africa years, I was very focused and very aware of the geopolitical situation in Africa. Yeah. I was noticing what China was doing on the continent, noticing what China was doing even in South Africa. We were competing against Chinese investment consortiums funded by the CCP, funded by the government. We were trying to do so honestly when they were bringing briefcases and paper bags of cash. And this is all factual. In 2020, when I stopped traveling and I was back in the U.S., all of a sudden it was like in the course of those months, as you know, there was so much going on in the first half of 2020, but my attention shifted radically, and I started to turn back really to my home, to America, and to some of the things that had been happening in the previous years, really leading up to 2020, many of which I had been ignorant of, frankly, that I just wasn't paying attention to, wasn't aware of, was reading and watching media that wasn't telling me the truth about what was happening. And I was sitting around the dinner table with my two then teenage boys in March or April, May of 2020, somewhere around then, when they started asking me very challenging questions about what in the world is going on around us. Yeah. What is it with this virus? What is it with lockdowns? What is it with this social unrest? What is happening, in our city streets? And I didn't feel like I had terribly good answers. And I turned my attention to trying to understand so that I could explain it to them, but also to myself, because I realized I didn't know what was going on. And my conclusion almost immediately was something that I had dismissed, which was this idea of fake news, that it was absolutely real, that it was pervasive, that it was undermining the truth, that it was hiding the truth, that it was official, it was misinformation from the government, from what I would now call corporate media. But that was relatively new to me. I knew some of the stuff was going on, but I just didn't realize the extent of it. When I started to look at what was being said versus the underlying reality by watching videos, reading transcripts of actual words spoken, I was shocked. And that led me down a road to start to write. I started writing op-eds and publications, starting in what I knew best, which was finance, the economy, how might COVID-19 impact the African century. I started to talk about inflation in 2020 because one thing that I saw early was that all of this that was going on with the lockdowns, with the stimulus spending the government was doing, this was going to lead us to a period of inflation, the printing of money over two crises back in 2008-9 and then again in 2020. And at that time, I was fringe, right? At that point, no one wanted to give credence to the idea that inflation was a real thing anymore. Anyhow, the culmination of all of that was that I started to write a book in 2021 called Why America Matters, the case for a new exceptionalism.
Yeah.
And in part, I wrote it because I realized I had a lot I wanted to say, first of all, but most importantly, because I realized that there were so many Americans who had either forgotten or had never been taught the truth of their own history, the reality of their own history. They were being actually told the opposite, a lot of lies about what had happened in our country and its history. And at the same time, I realized that we were in a stage where we needed it desperately. We needed to hear and remember and understand who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, with all of our weaknesses, our failures, our foibles, to recover the idea that there was something beautiful there and something very important, and that this nation still matters in a great way. So let me pause there. But that's a little bit of the quick version of my journey.
That's it's incredible. I think one of the things that jumps out at me is that your investigation or research, your study, didn't come from a business model where you determined, if I learn about this, then I can talk about this, and then people will follow me and I can build a platform. It came from your own desire to understand what was happening. I've said this several times. I've written a few books, and people ask, like, why'd you write that book? I'm like, well, because I didn't understand the topic and I needed to sit down and really figure it out. I wasn't trying to write a book. I was trying to understand, and it became something bigger. And in the process, you feel like you can help other people. Do you think that perspective has helped you get to what's actually taking place, instead of approaching this from I have an agenda and I need to prove that I'm right so I can communicate that to others? Do you feel like it's helped you to, I need to answer my kids, I need to explain this to them, and I need to understand it personally? Has that helped your process as you've worked through all of this?
It's helped it enormously, and let me explain how, in the sense that what was frustrating me at the time was I realized that I was being lied to, that my children were being lied to,
Yeah.
that Americans were being lied to. And that deeply disturbed me. I mean, it just, there's something about the idea of truth that I think that still matters, of course.
Yes.
And so I determined that I was going to, and I still am in this process of getting to the bottom, of getting to the truth, even if it was ugly, even if it was something that I didn't want to see, that I was going to choose to see what was there, no matter what the consequences were. And by the way, part of that process was I had to be willing to say, I am going to do this, and I'm not going to count the cost of it. I'm not going to worry about what are the consequences to my career, to my reputation, how others will think about me. Now, I will tell you that was not an easy thing. It was hard because I realized that I was going to start saying things that were not popular. And I experienced it, with very close friends, personal friends, work colleagues, and otherwise, who were very upset with me, that I had made a choice, that I was saying the things that I was saying, that I was confronting the issues that I was confronting, and, veiled threats of this is going to cost you. You're not going to be able to get hired again by a public company. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do that. And I just decided that it wasn't worth it, that I had to live with integrity. I had to live with a belief that I had followed the truth and that I had not taken the blue pill and gone back to sleep.
Hey, Situation Report, Jeremy Stolniker here. We've all heard about DC politicians and their incredibly well-timed stock trades. Well, according to veteran trader Ross Givens with Traders Agency, it's all true. These politicians have made absolute fortunes for themselves trading stocks. Ross has revealed there's a largely unknown legal loophole that allows regular people, patriots like you and me, to see when these elite insiders are buying up stocks and how to follow their lead to incredible profit opportunities. Now, Ross has been doing this for a long time. He's a former vice president of investment management at JP Morgan Chase. He's been trading stocks for almost 20 years and teaching clients how to trade their own money for almost a decade. And we've just been blown away by everything Ross has revealed, including exactly what this trading loophole is and how it works, how he's learned from these insiders for nearly a decade, and how the stock picks have gained 88% in 7 days, 234% in 8 weeks, and even 1,787% in 2 years. Go to theinsidertrades.com to start following these insiders yourself and get a free stock pick of one of the hottest symbols that is seeing huge insider buying right now. That website is theinsidertrades.com to see when these political insiders are buying stocks and get your free stock pick. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. So this is one of the challenges that I've had in my own kind of spirit as I've tried to work through the last couple of years and understand what's happening is finding good information. It seems like, we talk about polarization. You have whatever's happening on, we'll call it the left. Yeah. This is kind of corporate, politics, the message that's being pushed through the mainstream media. So you have that, but then it seems like there's no in between. There is then the far right where everything is a government conspiracy. Everything is someone's out to get you. Everything is this and everything is that, and we don't need to back it up. Just look at what's happening. We don't need proof. Look at what's happening. How do you feel about this? So there's this craziness on either side. And as a person who wants to know the truth, who tries to understand the truth, I definitely am much more on the right than I am on the left, but I want to know what's real. Where do you start? How do you talk to people who are like, look, I don't like the people who are screaming over here. I don't trust the people who are screaming over there. I do want to know what's real, but I don't even know where to start to find that. Yeah. What's the advice to those people?
Well, let me make one comment that I think is important just to set the stage for this, which is, and I say this in the book, Why America Matters, in the conclusion, and I make a comment that, I wrote this 2 years ago and it's now becoming less controversial than maybe it had been at the time, but I said that I believe that today.
Hey everyone, this is Jordan Seculo. You've spoken and we've heard you loud and clear. That's why this month we're doing something big. We're proud to announce our brand new ACLJ Life and Liberty Drive. Our legal teams will be focusing on the issues that you, our ACLJ members, have told us matter the most to you: life and religious liberty. We're redoubling our efforts to beat back the radical left's attack on your constitutional religious freedoms and to defend the sanctity of human life. Life and liberty are the cornerstones of our great nation, but they're not guaranteed. When the values we hold dear are under attack, it's up to all of us to take a stand or risk losing them forever. This is not just a call to fund our legal battles. This is your moment to get in the fight. Just as before, every tax-deductible gift will be doubled, dollar for dollar, through the ACLJ Life and Liberty Drive, giving you twice the impact to defend your freedoms and help us fight to literally save lives. Join the ACLJ in the fight to keep America free.
Turbulent times call for clear-headed insight. That's hard to come by these days, especially on TV. That's where we come in. Salem News Channel has the greatest collection of conservative minds all in one place. People you know and trust, like Dennis Prager, Eric Metaxas, Charlie Kirk, and more. Unfiltered, unapologetic truth. Find what you're searching for at snc.tv and on Local Now Channel 525.
The old school left and the populist conservatives now have more in common with each other than either of them do with supporters of the surveillance state, the perpetual forever wars, right. With what we see going on with the globalists, what we see going on around us. In other words, it was, we have to go back to the 1960s to realize it was some of the old school liberals who were the first to point out that, hey, everyone, there's a secret government being set up, a fourth branch of government that is undermining our Constitution. And at the time, conservatives poo-pooed it, said, no, everything's fine. We've got to fight the Cold War. We've got to do all this stuff. So I make the point only to say that, the axes have kind of shifted in that all of a sudden, we find someone who I would identify as a conservative, and increasingly as a populist conservative, identifying with some of those old writers and speakers from the 60s and 70s who were warning about the intrusion of privacy, warning about what the government was up to behind our backs, when I think at the time, conservatives were not doing that at all. To get back, so that's just a stage setting that I think the axes have flipped on us a bit now. Going to your question, like how do you actually get to the truth? I think it's hard because to your point, we know what social media does, that it feeds us more of what we are already interested in. So you have the echo chamber effect. You have the intentional disinformation aspect, which is coming from government. I think that's absolutely true. It is coming from corporate media. That's absolutely true. These are not conspiracy theories, or if they are, they're ones that are proven to be true, as it's turning out to be more and more the case. Right. But you're right. There's a lot of just sort of noise and propaganda. For me, I think, and maybe this was because I had a background in a business and an industry that was very data intensive, analytical. Like we had to not get it wrong. In other words, you had to get to the bottom of a number, and you had to make sure that what you were saying, because you were speaking to a board, the general public or whatever, that everything that you were saying had representations that came with it, that this was true, that you believed it to the best of your knowledge to be true, and that you'd done a level of diligence, you'd taken due care to ensure that it is. Now, not everyone has that sort of background, but nonetheless, I think the principle of taking it upon ourselves to investigate, taking it upon ourselves to dig. Now, people have jobs and families, and so most people don't have a lot of time for that, and so then it comes down to finding voices that you can trust who are doing that for you. I hope to be one. Again, for no other aim. This isn't a commercial enterprise as much as it is a truth finding mission, and because I think it matters and I care about what's happening in our country. But other voices, there are a lot of them out there who are similarly oriented, not so much towards aggrandizement or personal wealth or fame, as much as that they share a real concern about what's happening and a desire to speak the truth, speak truth to power, believing that the uncovering is the first step in any hope that we might have of recovery, of getting to a better place than we are right now.
Yeah, that's good. And there are some great voices. I mean, your website has some great resources on it, and there are a number that do. I feel like we get so caught up in this, I want to be part of this team or that tribe or whatever, that we're willing to just go down the line that the biggest voices drag us down. And that's a really dangerous place to be. I talk to people that I have, trusted for years and that I've listened to for years, and they're so spun up all of the time that they don't stop long enough to ask real questions. And I think that's very important. There's a lot more we could talk about on that, but let's talk about the case for a new exceptionalism. This is a very important topic. Mm-hmm. And it's important because there are so many people in America right now who live here that either don't understand how important the United States has been to the rest of the world historically, or they don't care for one reason or another. I don't know what all of those reasons are, but American exceptionalism is not something to be used euphemistically as, the enslavement of this group or that group or this bad thing or that bad thing. The world is a better place because of the United States. That's fact. Right. But so many people are pushing back on that. Can you talk about what you mean by exceptionalism, first of all, and, what that means? And then I want people to get your book, so don't break all of it down, right? But why do we need to be exceptional again?
Well, so let me try to describe what I view exceptionalism as, and let me maybe first express the negative, which is this is not a book or an idea advocating American empire. It's not a book, and I think in fact I'm quite negative on the turn that the United States turned after World War II, of really leaving its foundational ideas, which we'll talk about in a second, which I do think made America exceptional, finding themselves in the sole position of power, or within the West at least, leaving behind those foundational ideas and adopting a new God, leaving behind the God of the Puritan fathers, so to speak, and adopting a Babylonian God, a God of war, a God of empire, a God of aggrandizement, and that's really the place that we've been in for 70 years. So I essentially say no to that forever wars are not helpful, that we're bankrupting ourselves, we're decimating the flower of our manhood, of our youth, our children in every generation who go off to war, to what ends? And I think that there is something for the heroes and the people who display such courage on behalf of their government to see the wastefulness, see Afghanistan, to see even what's happening in Ukraine today. It's a real challenge. Okay, so it's not that. But the idea of American exceptionalism was that, and I use this idea, this metaphor of John Winthrop, who was leading a group of Puritans who were coming over in the 1600s, and basically wrote this very eloquent letter that talked about they have the opportunity to build a community that would be like a city on a hill, shining, for all the world to see. This idea that Jesus had gave, this metaphor of, let your light shine before the world in such a way that they can see it and glorify your Father who's in heaven. Winthrop at the same time gave a warning that said, if we betray this trust that's being given to us, so again, what's being given to us? We have the chance to start a new nation. They didn't know exactly what that meant at the time. They knew they were starting a new community, at least, that was going to get out of the religious persecution in Europe, get out of the poverty that was enveloping Europe at the time, get out of the interminable imperial wars that were going on in Europe, and they were going to start over where their faith was the most important thing. That idea, that seed of that idea, grew into, let's go up until the time of the Revolutionary War, of our rebellion against against Great Britain, into what became the most religious country in the world, the country that was most sort of purely devoted to this idea: there is a truth, there is a God. We want to order our lives both vertically with Him and with each other in a way that comports with that, and that seeped through everything. It seeped into commerce. It seeped into how we approached relationships with one another. And even, at the founding, at the revolutionary era of the Declaration and the Constitution, even if perhaps the founding fathers, the writers, the people who were contributing to the process were more deists or not necessarily as personally involved, that idea had permeated the culture, had permeated how they thought, how they looked at the world. So you have this weird combination of this Puritan thinking and then ideas from the Enlightenment kind of in Europe coming together to form, all right, the ideas behind the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all the ideas. What were those ideas and what made them exceptional? The idea that we were endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, okay? That meant that they could not be taken away by any government, by any bureaucracy, by anyone. They were given from God, and that we were all created equal. Now, we struggled to actually put that into effect, but the idea was there. The aspiration was there. And this is the point, is that since then we've been struggling to live up to it. But just because we failed to live up to it doesn't make the value, make the value any less virtuous, any less worthy of striving for. And so the idea of American exceptionalism is the idea that suite of foundational ideas and values, and again, I don't want to go through the laundry list of all of them, but things like rule of law, things like private property, things like equality, all of these things, while they've been talked about philosophically for a long time in Europe, there was no nation up to that point who had actually put them into place. Contemporaneously, France had just tried to take as much of them as they can, but severed the idea of a God, a lawgiver, a moral giver, and it ended up in complete chaos and bloodshed and horror, because you cannot separate those ideals from God without having to impose force and power, and that, of course, requires obedience, and obedience requires monopoly and violence, and et cetera, et cetera. And so here in the United States was the only place, and the nation, or part of the nation, wanted it so much that we were willing to go to war with ourselves to defend those rights, and to try to preserve the idea of union, to try to preserve the idea that slavery was not a foundational value. It was an aberration. It was an abomination against the values of our founding. There was so much conflict with the southern states at the time of the creation of the Constitution that they couldn't get to an agreement on it then. If they had forced the issue, it just would have resulted in the southern states seceding then. So they made a terrible compromise that eventually led to terrible bloodshed and conflict. But nonetheless, coming out of that certainly wasn't perfect even after that, but the combination of what President Lincoln and then President Grant sought to accomplish was extraordinary in the world. In the thousands of years of recorded history, slavery was the normalcy. Freedom was the aberration, was the innovation that America finally brought forth later, and still, as you know, in parts of the world today, slavery is still widely practiced in certain regions. So what I was trying to get to when I said an exceptionalism, and I said a new exceptionalism specifically, think about it in a couple of ways. One, let's go just do quickly the foreign policy side of it, is if you think about what I was saying at the very beginning, that we had this big period of expansionist philosophy that America had to be the global policeman, the so-called reluctant sheriff everywhere around the world to impose this Pax Americana. Well, that was sort of phase two. Phase one was really this isolationist phase. In fact, it was really the founding fathers really focused on that was their preference. We don't want to get back involved in the wars in Europe. Monroe Doctrine kind of caught this idea of you stay out of our backyards, we'll stay out of yours. It was funny for us to say it at the time because we had no power to enforce it, to keep anything out of the American. Hey, stay out, and more or less.
Don't come over here.
Don't come over here. Look at it. But it kind of worked for a while, and we would push back. In the War of 1812 is a great example. Push back successfully. And we stayed out of Europe, and we stayed out of Europe really until the 20th century. And then that splendid isolation shifts. So phase one of American exceptionalism, isolation, focused on expansion of the West, trying to move the reality of our experience into the aspirational ideals through the Civil War, through Reconstruction, haltingly, failingly. We then let loose ground, all that sort of stuff. We then move into this phase of interventionism in the 20th century, where all of a sudden, we were much more powerful. First of all, we had a lot of interests, commercial interests, that we wanted and needed to, or believed we needed to defend around the world as we grew stronger. And of course, as the European empires were fading, we were picking up the slack. And so we were stepping into the shoes of the British, the French, and others around the world, and especially after the Second World War, when all of the Western nations were just completely impoverished. All of Europe and Japan effectively became U.S. protectorates, and because we were parts of the government was so zealous to fight the Cold War, that we entered a phase where the ends justified any means, and we started to use means that we never should have. And I'm specifically referring to the rise of the power of the intelligence agencies, CIA and others, formed under Truman Truman came to regret it within a few years. Eisenhower was deathly afraid of the CIA. Kennedy was afraid, and turns out had a lot of reasons to be afraid.
Right.
And that rise of this sort of perpetual government was the grave sin of our history in the late 20th century. That I advocate and say this idea of new exceptionalism is effectively to renounce it, to repudiate that overextension, to go back to 3 branches of government, to find a way to dismantle what this monster that we've created, this Leviathan, in part labeled by the surveillance state, but also by the security apparatus that is the action arm of the intelligence gathering bureaus, covert operations, and that sort of thing, and that we have to get back to a form of nationalism, and I want to be careful on how I use that word.
Sure.
What I mean by nationalism is, in contrast to empire, the renouncing of global empire and saying America first, that we are going to defend our borders, we're going to let other countries run themselves. When attacked, we will defend. In other words, so it is not isolationism, it's not pacifism, but it is I think a more defensive position of saying, let us guard what is our own and focus on our own interests, focus on the American people as our priority to protect and to serve and to take care of, and not harm them at the expense of an idea of a global humanity that requires our people to suffer. So that's an aspect of it. And I suppose the new exceptionalism is the idea of a restoration of those foundational values.
Yes.
A remembrance and a reminder, and because we haven't really talked about this yet, but let's not forget that we have lost an entire generation who have not learned who they are as Americans, who, if they have any concept, is a false concept. And it's likely to take a generation to correct, but it requires a renovation of our educational institutions. It requires a renovation of our institutions, etc. There's a lot more to it that hopefully explains what I at least perceive as a new exceptionalism.
On MyPillow's 20-year anniversary, with over 80 million MyPillows sold, Mike Lindell at MyPillow wants to thank each and every one of you by giving you the lowest price in history on their MyPillows. You will receive a queen-size MyPillow for $19.98. Regular price is $69.98, and just $10 more for a king size. You will receive deep discounts on all MyPillow products, such as bed sheets, mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, and so much more. This is the time to try out some of their other amazing products you've had your eye on. Go to MyPillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use promo code SITREP to receive this amazing offer on the queen size MyPillow for $19.98. Or call 800-870-0283. This offer comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. It's time to start getting the quality sleep you deserve. Go to MyPillow.com and use promo code SITREP or call 800-870-0283. I think you are right on all of that. I agree with all of it. I think it's a travesty that particularly young people, I don't know where the generational line would be, but young people living today don't understand our history or why that history is important, dismiss the faith foundations of our country. I guess my question on this side of that explanation is it possible? Is it possible to deconstruct that fourth party, so to speak, the deep state, those who are actually pulling the levers? Is it possible to eliminate that? To put on my conspiracy hat, President Trump is no longer sitting in the Oval Office because he made an attempt, whatever that was, to do just that. And now we're living through the consequence of that. is it possible, A, to deconstruct that? That's number one. Number two, how do we get back to a place where our schools are educating young people on what America actually is, where we actually came from, what we have and should stand for? How do we get back to that place? What is the roadmap? What does that look like?
Right. So I think the first step is the one in which we're in, which is the great uncovering. And what I mean by that is I do believe that we are in a period of time where more and more Americans are waking up to what is going on. So let's go back to pre-2016. There absolutely was a subset of Americans who were fully tuned in to this issue of the permanent bureaucracy, the deep state, what was going on, the issues that President candidate Trump in 2015-16 was talking about. But for the most part, Americans dismissed it.
Yes,
I think it's fair to say that the majority of Americans thought that this was hyperbole, that he was trying to rabble rouse, that this was all sorts of other things. And then all of a sudden, you start to see all these things happen. You start to see what was happening during the Trump presidency around Russiagate, around a number of other issues. Most people didn't believe it at first, but then more and more information came out about how fraudulent that was. I think the real shift came around 2000 with with COVID-19, with the misinformation, with the attempts by the government to control. Now, let's not forget, you had going all the way back to 2013, you had Edward Snowden, right? You had, and I skipped over that, and that was terribly important because that was the first time that Americans, I think, well, that's not true. That's not the first time, but for this generation, there had been stuff back in the 1970s with the Church Commission where they had talked about some of the things, terrible things that the CIA had been involved with in terms of coups, assassinations, mind control of American citizens with drugs and other things. Like really horrible stuff.
Yeah.
But 2013 and Snowden was a reminder to Americans of just how pervasive this was. That this was something that was going on at a mass scale, so more people woke up at that moment, and then of course a lot of people went back to sleep for a few years. And then I think if you look at the cumulative amount of things that have been happening over the last 3 years, like we're really, we're living through it day by day. But you step back and we're in this extraordinary moment of revelation, of things coming to the surface that were hidden for years and years and years. I mean, even sort of opening up in recent years the deep history of the CIA with more and more documents becoming unclassified, looking back at some of the things that we suspected might have happened, now we know have happened, looking at pandemic response, looking at the lies that came out of a lot of our government institutions, looking at, even right now is what you're seeing is the unequal scales of justice that are being applied in looking at, whatever President Trump or former President Trump may or may not have done versus whatever sitting President Joe Biden and his son Hunter did or didn't do. It's just, it's not even, it shouldn't even be on the same scales because of the magnitude of what we're talking about here.
When I grow up, I want to work for a woke company, like super woke.
When I grow up,
I want to be hired based on what I look like,
rather than my skills. I want to be judged
by my political beliefs.
I want to get promoted based on my chromosomes. When I grow up, I want to be offended
by my coworkers
and walk around the office
on eggshells
and have my words policed
by HR. Words like
grandfather,
peanut gallery,
long time no see,
no can do.
When I grow up,
I want to be obsessed with emotional safety and do workplace sensitivity training all day long. When I grow up, I want to climb the corporate ladder
just by following the crowd.
I want to be a conformist. I want to weaponize my pronouns. What are pronouns?
It's time to grow up and get back to work. Introducing the #1 woke-free job board in America, redballoon.work.
Is about records and asserting a right to say, I think this was an unfair election on the one hand versus treason at the highest level.
Right.
I just don't know how you can give sort of equivalents to these same things. And even if there were equivalents, they're still not being treated in the same manner. And yet one is so much more grave and so much more dangerous to where we are as a country.
So this uncovering, and I think that is very, very important. It's chaotic, but it's
I lost
a good
your
chaos,
question, didn't I? I stopped answering your question.
Well, no, it's chaotic. I think it's a good chaos if if it really does wake people up. Mm-hmm. So then this is the thing that is always thrown on us, right? It's like, hey, do something, stand up and do something. We need to do something.
So
okay, got it. There's a lot of problems. What do we do?
What I should have continued to talk about is that I think what's been encouraging to me is seeing just these anecdotal examples of Americans starting to do things. Not just Americans, but even in other countries around the world, in Canada, in France, in the UK, where let's just take the parents of Loudoun County in Virginia, basically standing up, not backing down in the face of intimidation from the FBI and the Department of Justice, standing their ground. We need that to be replicated all over the country. And I talk a lot about in the book Why America Matters that this has to be grassroots. That it cannot be top down. It cannot be like, all right, everybody, just wait for the next presidential election cycle and then everything's going to change. No, it has to start grassroots. Why? Because the infiltration of the enemy, if I can use that term, of hostile ideas, hostile ideologies, both foreign and domestic, they adopted this plan decades ago. They have infiltrated every school board, every town council, every branch of government, every branch of the educational system, etc. And so we have to do the same thing. I will tell you that it's encouraging. So that's encouraging to see examples of parents, people getting off of their couches, getting out from behind their screens, and standing up. And we've got this whole crazy false narrative around what happened with January 6th, and it's terrible what is happening in terms of those prisoners that are political prisoners, really. But putting that aside, at the same time, we see citizens right now not taking the bait. So you look at the Trump indictments, not getting out there and raising Cain or causing havoc, just standing down and just not taking the bait, and that's good. But I wanted to say, the other aspect of it beyond just citizen involvement it would be the rise of citizen journalism, or the fact that there are real voices out there, many of whom who left the mothership, right? Mothership, who left the corporate enterprise, the Times or the Journal or the Post or wherever, and are now speaking truth. So that too, I think that's really important. That the fourth estate. It's really maybe more anecdotally, but it's interesting to look at all of the challenger presidential candidates. So excluding Biden and excluding Trump, have adopted Trump's positions around the deep state. Right. They're using different words. Right. They would never admit that they agree with each other. But, you go from DeSantis to Ramaswamy, RFK Jr. Others are basically, with the exception of a couple of the neocons, Pompeo and others, but essentially all of them aligning around this idea of it's gone too far, and I'm going to use whatever power I can muster to dismantle this. Now, to your point, that has been a battle that other presidents tried to fight and lost. Kennedy most tragically. Sure. But things have changed. Americans in 1963 believed their government for the most part. Yeah. They did not believe that their government would lie to them to that extent. I mean, there'd been propaganda in the wars and all that sort of thing. But they certainly didn't believe that their own government would undertake a coup and an assassination of a sitting U.S. president. Yeah. We now have this as part of the record's there. Right? The CIA's never come out and said, yes, we did it, but the record's there. So, and more Americans are aware of that. And I think there's been a shift, a tidal shift. And I'm not here saying let's, as President Kennedy said, let's blow the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. Like that might have been but it absolutely needs, at a minimum, drastic reform. For example, as RFK Jr. has talked about in his campaigns, separating the intelligence gathering from covert operations, reforming, and there are some things that you could do. I'm not suggesting that we have to just take a giant bulldozer to everything.
Sure.
But it needs real reform, and it needs real reform from the top. There are really good men and women, patriotic men and women in every institution in the federal government. But the leaders, many of the leaders, are undermining their role and undermining the American democracy.
Yeah, that's good. There's so much there. I was thinking of, as you're talking about, distrust, and there was a time when we didn't think that we would be lied to. I live in Southern California, and we just had this big hurricane scare, right? So everyone's talking about the hurricane and the big hurricane in Southern California. And it's so funny. We've gotten to the point, I think, collectively, where we distrust the media so much that people are like, this Weather Channel, people are lying to me. They must be lying. No, there's a real storm. We just don't know where it's going to end up, know. But it is this weird awakening, right? And people are stepping back and saying something needs to be done. We need to understand it. Man, it's so important. This is such an important conversation. Where can people follow you? Go to your website, follow you on social media. What would you like to point people towards?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do is to point everyone to stormwall.com. Stormwall.com is my website. I host it. It's where I keep all of my articles, videos, anything I'm doing on the media. You can find my book, Why America Matters, there, and other things that you can get. That's probably the most important thing. I am active on Twitter recently. I was never on Twitter before. In the last few months, I started to get active, so I'm sort of building up a bit of a profile there, and that's at MW_Stormwall. I wish that were simpler, but M as in Michael, W as in Wilkerson _Stormwall is the handle on Twitter, and I'm out there quite a bit, and I'm writing every week on these topics. So I'm talking about, again, going back to center of plate for me are things around the economy, what's happening in our banking system, what's happening with inflation. I'm talking a bit about the geopolitical situation around the effect of sanctions on the European economy, the effect of sanctions on the U.S. But I'm also speaking out about some of these issues around the indictments, around all of the other things that are going on, where I start to get irritated about seeing how the government is lying or manipulating or trying to throw us off the scent, I suppose, is the way to say it. Stormwall.com.
Yeah, thank you for what you do and for continuing to do it and taking such a comprehensive, fact-based, research-based approach to it. It's very, very helpful, and I think equips us to be able to have these conversations. Very thankful for you and the work you do. Michael Wilkerson, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Jeremy, great to be with you.
We were not made to live in isolation. Sadly, many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day.
A lot of guys end up drinking, a lot of guys end up losing hope. Some of them will go to the VA and they'll try to get, prescription medications to help with PTSD. They'll get pills for anxiety, they'll get pills because they can't sleep, now they'll get pills for depression. Before they know it, they're taking 12 different medications. And when it's not working out, these guys lose hope, and that's why there's 23 guys a day committing suicide.
The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. As a result, we've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live.
Everything they said just kept hitting me in the heart over and over and over again. It's like all the things that I didn't know that I needed to hear. And I opened my heart to God that week, dude, and I've been a different person ever since.
Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. We provide our programs and resources, including travel, at no cost to our warriors.
I remember talking to a licensed social worker who actually handed me a pamphlet to Mighty Oaks. So I went, and I'm glad I did.
By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. Our mission is to serve and restore our nation's warriors and families who have endured hardship through their service to America, and to help them find new life purpose through hope in Christ. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org. Hey, Situation Report, Jeremy Stolniker here. We've all heard about DC politicians and their incredibly well-timed stock trades. Well, according to veteran trader Ross Givens with Traders Agency, it's all true. These politicians have made absolute fortunes for themselves trading stocks. Ross has revealed there's a largely unknown legal loophole that allows regular people, patriots like you and me, to see when these elite insiders are buying up stocks and how to follow their lead to incredible profit opportunities. Now, Ross has been doing this for a long time. He's a former vice president of investment management at JP Morgan Chase. He's been trading stocks for almost 20 years and teaching clients how to trade their own money for almost a decade. And we've just been blown away by everything Ross has revealed, including exactly what this trading loophole is and how it works, how he's learned from these insiders for nearly a decade, and how the stock picks have gained 88% in 7 days, 234% in 8 weeks, and even 1,787% in 2 years. Go to theinsidertrades.com to start following these insiders yourself and get a free stock pick of one of the hottest symbols that is seeing huge insider buying right now. That website is theinsidertrades.com to see when these political insiders are buying stocks and get your free stock pick. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Great conversation, and again, one that we could expand, and I hope that we can have Michael back on. So much more we need to talk about, but appreciate his perspectives. Go and check out his website, check out his books. You'll learn a great deal. I mentioned this in our close, but one thing I appreciate about Michael is that he doesn't just tell you what he thinks or what he feels about what's going on. He talks about what is happening in the context of history, looking forward, and all of it is evidence and fact-based. And so I really appreciate him and would encourage you to go and follow him. If you have not yet subscribed to the show, please do that. Would love to have you subscribe so that you know when this and other episodes of the Situation Report come out. We want to make sure that you are the first to get a hold of those, and then you can share those out with folks that you know. Would love to have you do that if you have not yet. Thank you again for watching. If you're watching, for listening. If you are listening, look forward to talking to you next time.